So I'm aware we have apologies from Stuart Bell and Giles Bond-Smith on the governor's side, and that Helen Hyam will need to leave about 20 to 5. And we have apologies on the non-executive director side from Claire Flint, who hasn't been able to be with us today. I haven't been able to go down all the lists, but we have a number of other non-executive directors I can see on the call. And I know that Anne Tutt is expecting to join us, but she texted me about 10 minutes ago to say she was in another meeting that might be delayed. So she will be here shortly, I think. And then we have a number of our executive director colleagues who will be coming in for particular items. Is one of our non-executive colleagues now, Joy. I'm sure that Anne, if here, would remind us of her potential conflict of interest in relation to being trustee of the charity. Are there any other declarations of interest that need to get on the record today? I can't see anybody saying that, Neil and Laura, so if there are, then perhaps they could go into the chat. May I check then about the accuracy of the minutes? First of all, the minutes held on the 14th of July. Are there any corrections to those minutes? Neil?
It's actually not the 14th of July, but on the 21st of September, Jonathan Wyatt has contacted us to note the inaccuracy in him being in attendance, and we've recorded him as having given his apologies. So sorry to him for that, and we will get that corrected.
That was the 21st of September. Was there anything on the 14th? I take it then that we can agree those minutes as an accurate record. And if I may, then I'll take us to the action log. I don't know if Sam is with us as yet. We were going to give an update on the automated number plate recognition, but I think we'd better wait for Sam, Neil, for that. We have, or I haven't, but Caroline has, I think, contacted all governors to request permission to share details. I don't know how many of you have agreed to share your details, but please, if you haven't responded one way or the other on that, it would be good for you to do that. I don't think we should roll over that question. If people don't want to share their details, then that's their choice. And I would like to invite the council to perhaps invite one more round of invitation from Caroline, and not roll that forward to the next meeting. Is that acceptable? If people put it in the chat, then Caroline can pick that up from there. So thanks very much, Nina. And then we had a matter arising in terms of the lead governor position and the co-option. And I know from correspondence that obviously there's a bit of a messiness about this as a transition role, but we are in a position to confirm that people would like Cecilia to remain as lead governor until the next set of elections. And so that can be confirmed for the record, and you will of course all have an opportunity as agreed after next year's elections to make your choice of lead governor at that stage. I'm not aware of other outstanding matters arising or on the action log, but I do want to come back to the ANPR update when we get to have Sam with us. I'm just checking she's still not with us as yet. I can't see her. Can you, Neil?
No, no, I don't think she is. Okay. I think it's about 1:15 that we would expect her to be able to join us.
Thank you. That I think then takes me to Chair's business, and there are one or two things just to alert you on. The co-option of the governors whose term of office formally has ended, but we haven't got yet to the re-elections, have all gone out. And as far as I'm aware, everyone has agreed to carry on. Neil, I should note that due to a conflict of interest, Rosie Herring is not with us, having gone on to an overview and scrutiny committee, which conflicts her under our constitution. And I want to note what a big contribution Rosie has made, I think, from, well, certainly from well before my time. And I understand pretty much from the time the Foundation Trust was a twinkle in someone's eye. And we will miss her around these meetings, but I have no doubt we will hear from her if anything happens that she's not happy about. And we have a bit later on the report from the Future Arrangements Working Group, which I think is the first time during my tenure that we've sort of set up a task and finish group, but it's something that I expect we shall continue to be doing. And we'll be doing that in relation to membership strategy. We now have, I think, enough volunteers for that, and we are hoping to set up a meeting shortly. I have nothing, I'm afraid, to update on the ICS appointments. I'm not quite sure why that is. I know that the interviews for the chair of the integrated care system have happened. We've been led to believe that the outcome of that would be known imminently for about 3 weeks. I understand that they're coordinating all the national announcements, and I understand that they are interviewing for the chief executive officer of the ICS next week. So I'm hopeful that we will be able to brief people on who the chair and the chief executive officer are reasonably soon. But then I've thought that for about 3 weeks. So please don't hold your breath. But as soon as we do know, we will brief everybody. But I'm sad to say I don't have anything to report at this stage. And the other bit under my business is just to say that at AOB, I think we have a couple of things to pick up if they haven't already come up in the agenda. One of which is correspondence that, Tony, you've sent in relation to the starting of a new service. When we get to that stage, I'll just have to tell you, it turns out to be messier than I thought, and I'm arranging a briefing with Sam and with Bruno to try and get to the bottom of it.
We just need a little bit of action and urgency on it, Jonathan, I think.
Well, we'll try and pick that up outside the meeting, Tony, when I can tell you more, because I can't tell you much at the moment. But I just wanted to log that we recognise that. And similarly, there's an issue that Graham has brought to our attention about blue badge holders parking, which I hope we'll pick up once Sam is with us as part of the AN and PR. So I haven't lost those things, but I think I need some support from Sam before I'm in a position to answer those.
Okay, I must just thank you, Jonathan, for actually allowing it to go on the agenda. I think that's very appreciated.
So this won't make sense to anybody else, Tony. There's some correspondence in relation to a novel therapy which has been approved nationally and which we are aiming to provide, but we haven't yet been able to provide, and that has an impact on a small number of patients and families, but it's a very acute impact on those people, and it's proving trickier to get to the bottom of than I would have imagined. Once I know the answer, I will brief Tony and then perhaps others in more detail. Okay, I think we're a little stuck without Sam's presence because she has a very busy agenda for us today. And I think I might then need Martin to flip forward to item 9 and the future arrangements for meetings to pick that up while we're waiting for Sam. Can I invite you, Martin, to pick that up at this stage? I hope that's not unfair.
So sorry, Chair, to interrupt, but we do now have Jason with us, and as he needs to leave early, we might want to take his.
In which case, Martin's off the hook. Jason, you're very welcome. I'm just trying to find items that the executive directors are with, so we can now pick up the financial governance review, which, as governors will know, is a crucial part of us seeing through the Deloitte report into our management structures and the feedback on the well-led concerns to our Quality Commission, and we are keen to make sure that we learn from the review that we've had done into our financial governance processes, which have sometimes worried us because we've ended up with more money at the year end than we intended, and sometimes because we've had less money at the year end than we intended. And the key issue from the board's point of view is, have we got a robust enough budget setting process for us to predict reliably and also hold people to account for delivering on the budgets that have been agreed. And Jason, I think at this point I should hand over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm just looking through my papers pack and couldn't actually see the paper. I just want to check, Neil, that the paper has been summary slides have been distributed.
So yes, so Jason, I confirm that we sent out the slides that were used with the Performance, Workforce and Finance Committee have been circulated. They were in I think a separate circulation to the main pack. Would it be helpful to share those on screen for you?
Yes, please, because and then I'll just speak to them briefly, and then we can go to discussion. So while Neil's sharing these, what we haven't done, I think, is recirculate the long form report, which is an annex to the public board papers, which hopefully governors have already seen. So when I took the Performance, Workforce and Finance Committee through this, the board had seen pretty much a final draft of the report that then went out in the public papers. But Neil, if you just go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So just to remind everybody, and I appreciate for members of the Performance, Workforce and Finance Committee, there's a little bit of duplication here. The scope of the work was to look at our financial performance and governance in 1920, to look at the budget setting process, to analyse the performance and to make recommendations on financial governance and reporting. And also we asked for a slightly lighter touch bit of work on what the current arrangements were, not least because actually with COVID a bit of time had passed, and actually if we'd entirely sort of addressed some things from 1920, it wouldn't be helpful to have a long report which didn't comment on how things have moved on. Next slide, please, Neil. The key finding, and it's worth stressing that this was an external report, and we had NHS England Improvement who requested us to do it. We had them on the selection panel for the firm that did the work, and we had the regional CFO on the steering group, and also the ICS lead, James Kent, who many of you have met. And that was to ensure that they were comfortable with the robustness of the process, and we hadn't simply asked some people we were paying some money to sort of mark our homework and give us an overly positive grade. I know some governors will be new to the trust since 1920. In 1920, we didn't deliver our budget and we didn't deliver our forecast, and we made a small £12 million deficit. I say small in the context of a £1.2 billion organisation, but the key issue for NHS England Improvement, and I think indeed for the board, was not necessarily the scale of the deficit, but actually the fact that we couldn't plan and control it properly. Grant Thornton, well, I won't read each bullet point out because you have plenty of time to look at it. I would summarise by saying they thought actually that our core budgeting and planning process were pretty robust and reasonable, and our assumptions were good. And they also agreed with all our analysis. So we gave them a whole load of numbers to explain what had happened, and they told the board the same story back. It was learning from my team that they told the board the story back in a way the board found it much easier to understand, but they told the same story. but they did think that there were some areas where actually we could have worked better as a corporate team and an executive team with the divisions to actually pull through more opportunities to improve the finances. They did think the board could have challenged what was doable and not doable a bit more. And they did think, and this was one of the key issues from what prompted NHS England's review, and this is the last bullet in the planning section here, they identified that there was actually a mismatch in perceptions between the Trust and NHS England. The Trust internal reports flagged a lot more financial risk in our plans than NHS England identified. We learned that whilst we were quite concerned about financial risk, NHS England essentially put us in a category of organisations they weren't that worried about. So they were then quite surprised when we didn't perform to expectations, and we were surprised that they were surprised because we thought we'd been telling them that we had some challenges. Next slide, please, Neil. On this is the last of the sort of key findings on the governance. They broadly thought we were in the pack of what they'd expect, but they picked up on the journey we were on the IPR, and that's why they were able to say later that the IPR had moved on a bit, and also on there needed to be more work on the interdependencies and triangulation of the various aspects of our planning, the operational workforce and impact and financial impact. Please move on, Neil. I'm trying to give as much time, trying to give a flavour of the summary, but as much time as possible. I will say here that they basically reported that there was some progress since 1920, other than, you know, COVID had delayed things, but they did flag. We asked them to look in this sort of current assessment at how our planning was interfacing with the ICS, and I think the key point was that last bullet on this page, that they observed our ICS arrangements were still relatively immature compared to others, and there's quite a lot of work to do there. Please move on, Neil. Now, these slides don't list out all the detail, but effectively they bucketed up their recommendations into 6 areas, and you can see all this in the main report and in the executive summary. They thought we needed a more systematic approach to identifying and delivering productivity, particularly via the improvement programme, which Sarah Randall and I are working on at the moment. They thought we needed more work on managing controlling our workforce costs, which Terry Roberts and I are working on at the moment. They thought, and we did an extensive survey of budget holders, which wasn't sort of in the required scope for NHS improvement, but actually turned out to be a really rich and valuable source of evidence about what our budget holders, and particularly our non-financially qualified sort of leaders, understood about finance. And these 2 buckets about effectively there's both a gap in the confidence and capabilities of our budget managers, and linked to that gap there's a lack of understanding actually in the true underlying financial position amongst divisional and directorate budget holders. And we have got various programs of work underway on that. The understanding piece is amenable to sort of better technical explanation, but we're starting probably a considerable program of development for non-financial budget holders to improve their abilities to actually do, you know, what for some of our clinical leaders is one of the more challenging aspects of their role. The penultimate bullet really focuses actually on improving the IPR that the boards see, but also doing equivalent work actually at divisional and directorate level to make sure that the finance data is fully triangulated with the operational workforce data. And then finally, they made some useful, but I think in the short term, quite difficult for OUH to drive recommendations about how our finances could be planned better if our ICS finances were functioning better. In terms of the next steps, I think this is that's the last slide, isn't it, Neil? Yes. So the board has seen, I think, in public a summary of the action plan, and even the summary is a few pages long. And today, the Integrated Assurance Committee has been able to look at a much more detailed version of that plan with the milestones to all the deliverables, and has to be able to sign that off, and we will report on that. what challenged one of the best questions that I felt came up from one of the non-execs in the Integrated Assurance Committee conversation was that whilst obviously we have a whole series of recommendations and we will track the milestones for delivering those and implementing them, the question I was asked was, in aggregate, how will we know if we've succeeded or not? And what I said to the Integrated Assurance Committee, this was I'll write up an answer that will be slightly longer than the answer I gave at the committee this morning. Is, in essence, we need to get to the point that in the 22-23 financial year, the year starting in April, we set a budget that everyone buys into, or at least enough people buy into, and the board is happy to sign it off on that basis. And then by the end of the year, we've delivered it. So there's sort of 20 or 30 detailed actions to pursue, and you can track the individual actions, but the outcome actually, as Jonathan said right at the start, the outcome is that we end up with a budgeting process that delivers, and I don't purely mean delivers financially, but also delivers the financial underpinnings of our wider strategy and objectives. As opposed, I could relatively easily make the numbers add up, but it might come with a series of other outcomes that we were all highly unhappy about. So it's important that a good and successful budget process and financial governance process for OUH is about a little bit more than just the numbers being in black, not red, at the end of the year. And I'll pause there, Chair.
Thank you very much, Jason. So in a moment, I'll just check with Sarah Horden and also Tony Shapiro, who with me were involved on the non-exec side in the financial governance review, just for any observations that they make. And I have one other question for you, Jason, in a moment about where this places us with the regulators. So I'll warn you of that before I make a couple of observations. So just to summarise for governors, where I think this gets us to, and the sequencing has been slightly strange because this is the first time we've had a chance to receive this report in public governors meeting, but many of you will have seen it earlier, and it's been to PWF previous to this. Where the board has got to is it's initially saw sort of the headlines of an action plan, which was sufficient, I think, for us to agree that we could accept the report and the direction of travel. In Integrated Assurance Committee, which was only this morning, we've looked at a much more detailed inking in of the action plan, which includes milestones we'll be able to monitor activity against, and IAC was able to confirm that it accepted that action plan, which the board wasn't previously able to because it wasn't at a stage of detail that satisfied us that it would deliver the responses to the action plan. I think we had two main caveats about that. One was that it enabled us to see what the roadmap was for responding in terms of the actions that we did, and most of that is currently green rated in terms of progress on that roadmap, and we're mapping it quarter by quarter. But we couldn't necessarily tell whether doing those things would deliver the outcomes that we'd hoped for. So that's the point that Jason's made about our success criteria will not actually be that we do all the things we said we would do, although we obviously will monitor that, but does it add up to budgets that we can hold people to account to and are actually delivered? The other thing is that the red bit on the roadmap relates to the system level things that the Grant Thornton report identified would be crucial to our success. But while we don't have a governance system in place for the ICS, we don't have a chair and a chief executive officer, we can't with any confidence say that we can meet those steps in the process, which is not to say we won't work hard at doing it. It's just that we can't give you any confidence at this stage that we are, because we don't know yet who we're dealing with, and we therefore can't pin it down. So I think the IAC is confident that it can take assurance from the work that's been done responding to the Grant Thornton report, but whether it helps us actually make the cultural shift that we need to make in terms of I think it was Bruno who talked about it in terms of our clinical managers talk about finance, and our financial managers talk about clinical quality and safety. That's the prize we're after, and you really can't tell whether the set of actions will deliver that until you've tried it, and that's what Jason was talking about in terms of us beginning to monitor the impact. So Jason, just before I hand over to Sarah and Tony, can you just remind us where this leaves us with our regulators in terms of their confidence in our position?
Thank you, Chair. Well, strictly carrying out the review to their satisfaction was more important to them than actually following through on the findings. So what they've told me is that they informally they will want to know how we're doing on implementing it, but actually our signing off of the action plan and deliver the action plan is not something that's going to play into their decision making, whereas actually carrying out a review to their satisfaction did. I think it's worth noting that there was an implication there that had the findings not come back and said you're running a basically sound process that you need to tighten up, had they come back instead and said you're running a fundamentally flawed process and you were didn't know what you were doing, then the outcome might have been different.
Thank you. Sarah, do you want to just put a non-executive perspective on that? And I'll just check with Tony and then I'll throw it open for governors.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually, Jonathan, you summed it up extremely well and Jason's presented it well, but I think the review was a fair reflection of probably what we thought from a board perspective.
You're a bit quiet, Sarah. Can you pull the microphone up a bit?
Is that better?
That's better.
So sorry, I was just saying, Jonathan, I think you've summed it up very well in terms of where the reviews come out, and I think Jason's set it out well. I think from a non-exec perspective, I think the review probably fairly reflects certainly what I felt was going on in terms of how we got to where we got to. I think the action plan has got some good steps in it in terms of changing the culture, creating a more financially aware culture through the organisation and trying to link better quality and finance together. So that whole delivery piece, so the triangulation against the clinical strategy, the quality and the finances. So I think we need to monitor very carefully those actions, but I also think it's already changed from my perspective, the conversations that we're having. So I think we had a very good conversation at IAC today around the current finances, the challenges for the next half. And I felt that was framed in a slightly different and clearer way, probably as a result of some of the work that's happened through the finance review. So just thinking about how we tell the story, where the numbers are coming from, and making it easier then to create the right challenge.
Thanks, Sarah. Tony, do you want to add anything or should I throw it open?
Just to simply say, I thought it was a very constructive process. And I was particularly encouraged by the emphasis on clinical directorate buy-in in the future. And I think that we just need to run this process together with the maturation of the clinical strategy. But overall, I thought it was a very positive process.
Thank you. So thrown open to governors now. You've got a flavour of the executive response and the sorts of questions we've been asking as non-execs. And I wonder what else you would like to ask. Cecilia.
Thank you, Chair. Jason, I am not a finance person to say the least, but can you just explain what you mean by buy-in and who do you want to buy into this? Is this the clinical engagement with the leaders or is it stakeholders? Can you clear that so we know where the blockages are?
Sure. Well, I think you're not necessarily going to get to the point where every budget holder in the trust is 100% bought into something, because it's never going to be that easy. But we have effectively budget holders at divisional, directorate and service level. And the challenge we have is there is never as much money as a set of very ambitious clinical leaders would like to deliver everything they can see they'd like to do for their patients. If your budget holders don't in the main buy into their budget and try to deliver it, you end up with an overspend that there's not much you can do about from the executive corridor, because you at that point you're left with sort of arbitrarily cutting expenditure as opposed to actually restricting expenditure in the areas you want to restrict it. So we need the process, the outcome of buy-in is that the choices we have to make about who gets resource growth and who doesn't are accepted by people, so that they actively try to live within the budget, even if they would have liked a greater budget. That's what buy-in means. The board was quite conscious that this is in 1920, that if a couple of chunks of the organisation don't buy into their budget, they then actually don't necessarily try as hard as they could do to control expenditure, and that's one of the drivers to missing your budget overall.
Do you actually sufficiently engage with them to explain your decisions? Because constantly I hear that's the execs and the exec core, they don't do this and they don't do that, and then rumours just circulate.
It's about the nature of the engagement. One of the things that we sort of flushed out, and one of the reasons why Grant Thornton gave the sort of the process not a clean bill of health, but they said it was reasonably robust, is we did 4 or 5 rounds of big sessions with the whole divisional leadership teams, for example, on the planning process for 1920. But the sort of gaps were, one, how well do the divisional leadership teams cascade those conversations to directorates and services? Because we and secondly, and this is where some of the recommendations and the actions about getting a greater understanding of the financial position at that budget holder level come in, which is that we may be wrong, Grant Thornton may be wrong, but the theory is that if we do a better job of explaining the financial constraints we're under, the money we have, the choices we have, the consequences if we overspend, that we can take more budget holders with us on the journey of making the best use of limited resources, than have people, as you say, just saying they don't understand. We a little bit will actually be in a supportive way, cascading the board and executive team's understanding of the constraints we operate under down through the management of the organisation, so that if we succeed, everyone realises how difficult the balancing act that we're all trying to pull off together is.
Thank you.
Cecilia, we should say that one of the bits of information in the Grant Thornton report was a survey of budget holders, which elicited the degree to which they felt properly supported in generating the budgets, believed that the budgets were realistic and those sorts of things. And Jason said earlier that he proposed to rerun that survey to see whether or not in the next budget process we got a different response. So I think that's a really important element of what we're trying to achieve. Okay, I have a little queue. I have Nina, and then I have Shad, and then I have Helen. Nina.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Jason, for explaining the process. I just wondered what sort of understanding there might be from finance and from the finance leadership about the drivers, the motivational factors, all the way down the chain in the organization that would persuade or incentivize people at different levels to engage and try and own the budgets. Because that's always a challenge, because people at different levels of management and leadership have different factors that drive them.
I think that's a really good question, Nina, and it's one that actually Grant Thornton only partially answered. So they identified that there were some gaps in understanding of both the trust-wide position and also the sort of the true position of certain services. And their theory, therefore, is that improving understanding will improve buy-in. And they also identified some interesting gaps in terms of capability, and some of them were really quite subtle. The example I trot out for people is actually about the language, for example, that the finance teams use. So they found that the majority of budget holders felt they didn't understand what it meant when a finance colleague talked to them about a run rate. But if they were asked, if their finance colleague talked to them about a trend, they felt they understood what the conversation was about. And so there's a little bit of subtlety around the language we use. But I think the last bit of your point, actually, I don't think we got to the bottom of, and we might need to try to explore, which is, what other than understanding and improving kind of capability might be required to drive engagement? Because I come to work every day engaged by the fact that the NHS is a tax-funded system free at the point of delivery, and that will only continue if we actually make good use of the money we're given. And frankly, you can see in some of the political noise at the moment how the political support for sort of what we do could change if we are not seen to deliver with the money. But most of our colleagues don't necessarily make the link between actually the good stewardship of our resources and the reasons they come to work every day to actually deliver treatment to patients. And I think we probably need to do a little bit more thinking on that.
Jason, thank you very much. That was my point. Thank you. And if at some point in the future you'd like to discuss this offline, now I'd be very happy to share some experiences with you.
Thanks, Nina. Shad.
So, Jason, I think we briefly touched on this in the performance finance meeting. I cannot say, I think from within the hospital as a staff member, it's a very good thing to be having, to be allowing people within to understand budgeting a bit more, because I think you will much more likely get buy-in. Otherwise, within divisions, they're so different, they're so vast, and it's such a massive organization. There is going to be a slightly selfish attitude where you try to look after your population more so than the bigger picture. But it's only by understanding the bigger picture can you have any hope of getting that done. I guess my main question was just to ask, at what level are you going to allow for budgeting? Is it divisional, or as a clinical director of a service, would I be allowed to see that? Because I think if with regards to engagement, I think if there's transparency, if I as a clinical director can see that the clinical director in, I'm going to make up a service, obstetrics is struggling, you're more likely to understand the flow of money going in one direction more so than just, well, what about my patients? That kind of thing. So where are we aiming this? Is this divisional or below or at clinical directorial level?
I mean, we're aiming it at least at clinical director level. So one of the vehicles for doing this is some of you will be aware we're rolling out a new clinical director development program over the next few months. I think it's just started. It'll be a sort of case study type approach in which we have half-day long modules developing with a lot of pre-reading, developing the technical skills of our clinical directors on a whole suite of management skills, but using a case study project they want to happen as the vehicle to engage them. And my deputy and I are going to personally teach the half-day finance module, and I've identified a whole load of work on that. But I'm already, since the summer, I've been personally teaching the finance module of our Emerging Leaders Programme course. And what I'm hoping to learn enough from those experiences is to work out what the sort of curriculum and pitches that a slightly wider group of people can deliver to a wider group of managers. So it's at least the divisional teams and the directorate teams, but my experience from sort of teaching the finance module of the Emerging Leaders Programme is it's ultimately it's an even wider group of people.
Yeah. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Chad. I mean, I suspect this is a process of working our way down the organisation. So at each stage, we get better confidence in the buy-in to the budget setting process, and then you move to the next one, so that actually we get a sense that there's a common purpose here, that good stewardship enables clinicians to deliver. I mean, that's what we're after, but we have to do it sequentially in order to get there, I think. Chad, did you want to come back on that, or can I move on to Helen?
But I can't hear.
Helen.
Thank you very much. Please do move on.
Okay.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'm going to try with the camera. I'm having a little bit of a problem with Teams today, so I hope my bandwidth doesn't fail me. Thanks very much, Jason, for the clarity of your summary there. And I think it points nicely to the semantics we've just been discussing. The language of finance is quite opaque. And this is something that we've discussed over the years in leadership programs and in our divisional and clinical directors sessions. So I'm delighted to hear that you're going to be developing the teaching on that, and I'm wondering whether it might actually be available on the Learning Hub at some point, so we could all access it and learn a little bit more about it. But I guess for me, having attended the same performance and workforce committee that Shad did, it was extremely interesting, quite an eye-opener, actually quite enjoyable, Jason. I was a little bit surprised, but I did wonder whether
We'll be a budget holder before you know it, one of the divisions.
We're quite good at beating ourselves up, and I wondered about benchmarking. You know, what do we look like against other similar enormous, you know, Shelford Group type organisations? They must be struggling in the same way we are, or similar ways.
So it's a really interesting question. I think and there's been a bit of volatility over the last sort of 2 or 3 years. We are about average in efficiency for the Shelford Group. I mean, pretty much within pretty much statistically spot on the average level of sort of financial efficiency of the Shelford Group. We perform probably slightly worse than the average on the headline outturn figure, not least because some of the London trusts have pulled off a series of spectacular property deals over the last few years, which have made their sort of headline financial results look quite good. I really can't see many benchmarks on the kind of more cultural aspect. Interestingly, one of the things that we want to do, partly driven by the FGR and partly driven by other things, is fundamentally have a look at our planning processes. And I've been in contact with other Shelford trusts to say, look, do any of you think you do this really, really well? This is what we think good looks like. And no one said they do it well. And a couple of other trusts have put their hands up to join us on collaborating. There's a really interesting matrix on one of the national closed benchmarking sites, which tries to plot people's efficiency and deficit on a quadrant. And you really want to be in the top left-hand corner where you're making a surplus and you're efficient. And the one of the things I've sort of quietly said to a few board members is, if you look at that top quadrant of efficient trusts who are making surpluses, there's only 6 in the country who are also rated outstanding by the CQC. So the number of people who've actually managed to pull off good, you know, sort of hitting the numbers each year to keep the kind of regional team happy, doing it by being efficient rather than kind of one-off property deals, and managing to do it while also delivering outstanding care is vanishingly small, which, and I'm talking to a couple of them, but we shouldn't beat ourselves up too much because the number of people who manage to really ace this is really very small.
Which is not to say we don't want to be one of those in the future. I've got Martin and then Jonathan, then Sally Ann. Martin.
Jonathan, thanks. A couple of the things I found most striking in the key findings summary, which you just took us through, was one bit under reporting and governance when it talked about operational workforce and finance information being produced in silos and not focusing on interdependencies between those areas. And then in the culture and capability assessment, it talked about budget managers having a good understanding of objectives, targets, risks and accountabilities, but did not feel sufficiently engaged in budget setting. And a good level of engagement with finance and budget reports, but staff do not always feel in control of their activity and resources. The question I wanted to ask was, inevitably with finance, there has to be quite a lot of top down, especially with your gruesome negotiations with NHSEI always in the background or foreground, probably foreground. But I'm just wondering how good you feel the bottom to top communication is, and how far, if at all, you are along the road of getting actually the bods on the ground at level 11 below ground or whatever it is, to be proactive in helping financially manage the trust. Because in the end, the higher up that line goes, before anybody feels involved, the more opportunities are lost in actually using the resource well.
No, I agree, Martin, and it will be a long journey. And look, I mean, sadly, a little bit of this, unfortunately, will be that some of our budget holders probably need to share the executive team's perspective. So we aren't in complete control of how our budget is set from the centre, and we often look at the sort of ask operationally that the region give us and the money that we've got and go, those aren't desperately aligned. So part of what we've got to do is rather than one of the observations, it may have been Jonathan who made this in some of the board or IAC conversations, was, you know, don't just hold that problem at the executive team level. We've got to share that challenge with a wider group of people. So these won't always be, this will frequently be an uncomfortable set of conversations, because we're put in a very uncomfortable position as a leadership team at times, and actually, you know, more minds may come up with a better solution, but they won't magic away the sort of mismatch potentially between some of the challenges the whole trust has set.
Thanks very much, Jason. I mean, there's another element which has come to the fore, which we discussed, and which is part of the same pattern, Martin, which is that one of the reasons that people don't necessarily take seriously the budgets they're given is because they know that the NHS keeps changing them during the year and new pockets of money become available. And I think, Jason, you were telling us about bidding at something at 28 hours notice or something of that sort, that, you know, you either put in or you don't. So there's a sort of sense of, while the system operates like that, why should people take their budget seriously? But we won't get a grip on our productivity until they do. So we have to somehow pull off the opportunism of going after money without losing the discipline of the management. So it's not going to be easy, and it's particularly not easy in the current funding climate, where I think, Jason, you were telling us this morning that you got the details for the 1st of October half on the 28th of September.
No, Chair, the 30th of September. You're being too generous to our national colleagues.
So we are in a context that does not make this easy to do, but nevertheless we're having a go. I've got Jonathan Wyatt next.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I assume from the information that I've got that you have the ability to allocate resources. I'm not very good at accountant speak, but one of the things that I noticed in the paperwork that I've had in previous meetings is that there was a very large, and in fact the top waiting list was at the eye hospital in John Radcliffe. Could you please... Hello, can you hear me?
Jason?
Yes, I can hear you fine, thank you.
Okay. The top waiting list was at the eye hospital. Could you please give a pot of gold to Professor McLaren to help him with that clinical need? Because I think it's necessary. That's all.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm afraid we may have to disappoint on that basis. Jason, what can you say to that?
No, it's a very good question, and yes, ophthalmology. I don't know if Sarah's with us, but ophthalmology and ENT are two of our specialties with the biggest gap between capacity and demand. And we're working very closely with Robert and all the ophthalmologists. Actually, the operating theatres in the eye hospital are pretty much, you know, at max, and so we're looking at other operating theatres that we either control or can partner with other organisations in Oxfordshire to increase capacity. We're looking at other options on short-term capacity, and in the medium term, we're going to need more ophthalmology capacity in Oxfordshire. One of the real challenges of running our budget is that when you try to rectify a gap between demand and capacity at short notice, you generally pay a premium, and if you get predictable sort of financial flows, you can actually plan and do things more efficiently. So there's sort of, for the ophthalmologists, there's two answers. There's quite a lot of gold going in various directions, not actually towards the eye hospital because it's full, to try to actually increase capacity in the area, but medium term, Robert has an ambitious plan to expand ophthalmology in Oxford, and he is one of our most outstanding clinical leaders, and I generally try to play in, you know, a perspective that you look at the need and the business plan, but you also look at the people, and that's one of the people you would back to deliver. He's one of the people you back to deliver.
Yes, because the Oxford University Hospital is world class, and they certainly need to be helped to keep up that international reputation.
Thanks, Jonathan. I think the big waiting list is mostly of people who are not at that sort of category. It's partly a volume thing, and it's partly something we need to sort out across the whole of the integrated care system. But we note your wish for a pot of gold, and had we got pots of gold, many people would be competing with them. So I don't think we can commit to moving things around on the back of this conversation. We can recognise the opportunities for increasing our resource using the Centres of Excellence. I'll need to move on to Sally Ann, and then I've got Graham on to Sally Ann. Sally Ann.
My comments link to those made by Martin, and I'm just wondering, Jason, how involved your communications team are in helping you deliver the messages. In fact, not just you, but your divisional leaders and budget holders in helping you shape and craft the messages so you can get staff more involved.
Sally Ann, you're breaking up a little bit.
Oh, sorry. Involved there are for the communications to be involved, and maybe they are.
So I think, Sally Ann, your question was about whether we were taking advantage of the expertise of our communications teams as part of getting these messages down the organisation. Jason, I'm not sure the answer to that. Our comms team spend most of their time on external communications rather than the budget setting process. Jason, do you want to pick that up?
Yes, I mean, we use them a little bit. We also use the strategy team because their sort of partnerships and stakeholder management function is quite well adapted to that, and actually we'll be crafting some of our next set of communications, working with both those teams. So no, it's a very good point, Sally Ann.
And I think I'd add to it's something that Sarah Horton has said, which is that the clarity of presentation of the problem that comes when you get someone like a consultancy group whose basic job is making things look easy has been helpful to us. And I think we are working with Jason, or Sarah and Jason are sort of talking about how we get that sort of presentation to help the board, and it would also help further down the organisation, I think, to have that clarity.
I think it would, because unless they can understand it, you won't get the buy-in.
Thank you, Sally Ann. Graham.
I just wondered whether I might be allowed to be a tiniest bit disruptive.
Of course. How could we stop you, Graham?
Well, I think the combination of knowing that there are pots of gold out there and being able to sort of fudge it for another year and carry on somehow is quite unhelpful in being very radical in the way we think about money. And I just wonder whether, I'm not saying it should be done in real life, but a financial exercise might be conducted whereby we cut all the budgets by 20%, and we wait for the shouting to die down, and then we see, well, I wonder what we could do with that. Actually, there is stuff we could do, because it just is feeling a tiny bit complacent at the moment.
So Jason, they've just added a nought to your 2%. So
I think that's great, Graham. And if you want to come and facilitate that workshop with me, then that'll be exciting for both of us.
Well, I don't think I have the protective gear for that.
But I mean, you make a sort of fundamentally sound point, which is we need, necessity can actually often drive some innovative thinking, and we saw in a non-financial sense, we saw that in relation to COVID, and we need to find safe ways of asking very challenging questions, because that sometimes actually answers drop out that people wouldn't have come up with actually if you hadn't created that space. But I think we might do it in a slightly less crude way than pretend everyone was going to lose 20% of their budgets. But I think the fundamental insight, though, is still sound, actually, which is that there are, in some areas, some opportunities to do things radically differently, and people won't necessarily bring those to the fore if we don't prompt them.
Exactly. Thank you.
Jules.
Yes, I'm not going to agree with you at all, Graham. Though I I would say post-COVID, with a lot of the supplies going centrally and other, I think we have lost the ability, especially for small budget holders like myself, to be accountable for every penny. So the impetus isn't there anymore to save. So I was overspent for the first time ever last year with my agency costs, and I never got into trouble at all. And years before that, I would be absolutely, oh my lord, having to justify every penny. So although I don't agree with Graham's comments at all, and I know half of it was said, you know, tongue in cheek, but I do think we have lost some of the accountability, because if we look after our pennies, it'll make your life easier, won't it, Jason?
It would, Jules. If only everybody was as good as you, Jules, at delivering your budgets. Jason would be very happy.
Wow.
Jason does need to leave very shortly. I think, Jason, I should just move this on in a moment. We haven't officially got anything on the agenda just about the budget setting process for the second half, but we are in a climate where it's become more difficult to connect minor changes in activity to the money that comes in because of block contracting, and you were briefing us a bit about that earlier. If I understand it right, though, we have significant pressures that we have to deliver in terms of cost savings to deliver the year end, but they're not so unrealistic as Graham's thought experiment would require us to make. Can you just reassure the governors that although the financial situation is challenging, it's beginning to get a little clearer to you?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, what we're working through now is the Prime Minister made an announcement in late August or September about NHS funding, and that's working its way through to how much resources the Trust will have for the second half of the year, which is a fair bit clearer than it was. Unsurprisingly, and this is the sort of same as you'll see in sort of the national press, the fiscal screws are tightening slightly as we come out of COVID and we begin to think as a country about actually the balance of debt and the growth of the economy, and how much tax can be collected and spent, and how much can be borrowed. So we will have less funding in the second half of this year. Hopefully we can deliver everything we need to, and we are just working through exactly how challenging that will be. There's also quite a lot of money still yet not allocated in regional and national pots, and I'm working very carefully with TME to make sure that we don't take an unnecessary prudent view immediately until actually all of the sort of slight discretionary pots of money have found their way through to us. But it's undoubtedly going to be tougher in the future than it was obviously in the period, as Jules said, when effectively during the peak of COVID, when we were just given any money we asked for. That's not, quite rightly, that's not the world anymore.
Thanks, Jason. We need to let you get on. Thank you very much for joining us for that. And I need to move to Sam. Things for you, starting with just an update on the automated number plate recognition, which we had on the action log, but we skipped over while you weren't with us, and then we shall go to the expression of interest. Sam, can you just update us on that?
Yeah, no problem. Can I just ask in what context? Because I wasn't at previous governors' meeting.
So I think there's a general question really, is it going smoothly? Because a number of governors were anxious about the potential for it being implemented and causing significant difficulty. There's a specific thing that's come up in correspondence around blue badge holders and their understanding of how they get themselves parked in the change of system, which I know that Caroline is getting to the bottom of, and if you haven't already seen that correspondence, Graham, it will be on its way. But the general issue really was, is it working as we hoped it would, or are there glitches? Because there was some concern amongst governors that previous hospitals implementing ANPR had done it rather fast, and then it had a lot of unexpected consequences. So it's really just knowing whether or not it's going smoothly from your point of view.
Yeah, from my point of view, it has gone smoothly. No escalations from the travel and transport team. I'm happy to provide something a bit more formal, and happy to look at blue badge issues. If there's anything that can just be dropped to me, I can have a look.
Thank you. So we'll pick up the blue badge things which are already in hand. I think if it was having some of those problems that other hospitals picked up, we'd know that pretty quickly. So I think we'll take that as assurance at the moment, Sam, but you may find that governors feed you things that they pick up from members and the community. Can I move us then to the Horton General Hospital Health Infrastructure Plan expression of interest? We don't want to get everybody excited about this because it's just a step in a process, but we thought it was obviously important that governors had a chance to receive a briefing and ask questions that they have. And I think you're probably doing this alongside with David, Sam.
I am, yeah, and I'm going to just use the slide deck that we circulated, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
I don't know if Laura or Neil can pop up the slide deck for me. Brilliant, thank you so much. So as Sir Jonathan said, a double up between David and myself, and really the purpose of this is just to further endorse the submission of the expression of interest that we submitted in September, external timeline that was beyond our gift. Also, really, purpose of this paper is not to sort of look over the fine detail of the proposal, because there's obviously ongoing work that David will pick up in a moment around the clinical strategy, the wider BOB strategy, and also to share that this expression of interest, the draft, was shared with the Health Overview Scrutiny Committee. Next slide, please. So just in terms of background, Department of Health and Social Care invited expressions of interest from NHS trusts who wanted to be considered for inclusion of the next wave of the health infrastructure programme, with their background commitment to build 40 new hospitals by 2030. And at this given time, there are 8 places remaining. So it's a 2-stage selection process. We submitted our expression of interest, which has been circulated to you on the 9th of September. We're awaiting confirmation of the wider long listing process. And should we get through that gateway, there'll be a final decision in spring. Also, just to give some assurance that we took our draft expression of interest and had a wider conversation at Investment Committee. We also had a presentation at IAC and then finally approved by the board on the 8th of September for the submission that we put in on the 9th. Next slide, please. So this is just familiarisation of the selection criteria. I won't run through that, but what I would say is that with our experience of the build of the new critical care unit, using the modern methods of construction that I'll run through in a moment, we've had a lot of interest from the new hospital programme. So the clinical team have come down, they've visited the critical care, the new build, and Charmaine and I presented at a national conference last week with the new hospitals team to share our experience of how our estates and capital team have significantly reduced the costs and the timescale of that build. Next slide, please. So really, this is just to give you assurance that the EOI was mapped completely into our trust strategy, which we're all familiar with. Next slide. And then this is the real detail of the expression of interest that we put in. So I'm just going to rewind a bit. Let me look back at my notes from the paper. So just for a bit of sort of legacy information, particularly for new governors, there's been a desire to support the redevelopment of the Horton Hospital for a number of years. In 2016, there was a strategic review of the Horton General Hospital, and then there was a followed up CCG consultation, a public consultation. The Trust engaged with ECOM in 2017 and really started with earnest master planning process. But due to the capital constraints and a number of other factors, this was paused. So what we've done is we appointed a design team in October 2019 to sort of revisit and refresh. And their view was that given the age and the condition of the buildings on the Horton site, the vision is really to replace the hospital in its entirety, creating facilities that are safe, fit for purpose, and that can service a growing population. We've also said worked with health planners to look at the population in North Oxfordshire. So I won't run through that list, but there's a pretty comprehensive list of what's included within the expression of interest. We go to the next slide. So as I say, we appointed the design team in October 19. They undertook the various stages of feasibility studies for us. We undertook some fairly light touch stakeholder workshops between 19 and 20, and then completed a financial options appraisal, and then the outline of the SOC line, the outline case. Next slide. So the preferred case that we've put in is a 3-phase case, coming out with a cost estimate initially of 706 million. I'll come on to the next slide for some more detail. So our approach to our bids submission was to review some of the architectural assumptions so that we could look at potential reduction in total square metre reduction, look at the phasing approach as set out in the previous slide, the 3-phase approach, and then maximising opportunity for modern methods of construction. So similar to how we've constructed the critical care build, most of this is constructed off-site, which minimises the disruption on-site, reduces that lead time for the building to go up, and the other benefits that are listed there. So when Charmaine and I and David sat down with Bruno to look at sort of how things have really progressed, what really came to light was the significant costs through sort of historical NHS protracted design and business case processes, often ending up running into years. So the learning from the critical care building, which was done at some pace, as colleagues will know during the pandemic, that really 18 months is a really shortened design and business case approval process. That requires a real lockdown and real engagement with clinical teams. So that's a significant cost saving. And in fact, when David and I sat down with Charmaine and Bruno to look at previous works, actually some of the previous designs either doubled or tripled in cost due to this kind of protracted design and business case approval process. So the consolidated programme also consists of 6 months worth of enabling works, 2 years of building in the phases. And that again can double and triple if we're not using these modern methods of construction. Sorry, it's just come up ahead of my slide there. So the area that we really focused on through investment committee was the level of confidence that investment committee had around the previous experience that we had around the critical care building to get the costs down to the proposed costs. So that was approved for recommendation through Trust Board. And if I hand over to David, David's going to discuss some of the stakeholder engagement that we also progressed in parallel.
Thanks, Sam. I'll be relatively brief here because I think the presentation is quite comprehensive, and I think it's best if we take questions. But from an engagement perspective, it was difficult to do the sort of breadth of stakeholder engagement we would normally wish to do in these sort of processes, but that was driven by the national timeframe. So the expression of interest launched in July had to be in for September, which meant, of course, that we were now in the August period, which makes it always very tricky to arrange suitable groups. So we did communicate it with the CCG. We did attempt to communicate it with the Horton HOSC, but that wasn't possible. So we did it via correspondence rather than how we might have wished to do it. We have now put the bid in, and then really it's about understanding what the next steps are to that. So if we will either be discounted from the start or asked to provide some more information and then go through a process. In the event that it's the latter, we will then undertake more stakeholder engagement with relevant parties up in North Oxfordshire. So that includes everybody from stakeholder groups, MPs, council, etc. I mean, the MP was very supportive of this bid, Victoria Prentice. So our sort of round of stakeholder engagement hasn't been planned or communicated yet because we want to wait to see whether we're progressing down the process. It would seem it wouldn't be very proactive of us to arrange all those sessions and then find out we weren't in the running race for these bids and then have to cancel them. So, and unfortunately, it's not too clear when we find out. So it's when they published the expression of interest process, they didn't say submit by this date and by the 30th of November we'll let you know. So it's a bit out of our control at the moment for that, but our plan will be definitely to communicate this and get everybody involved and excited about it if we carry on through the EOI process.
Thanks, David. Graham.
Thank you. I just wondered, now we're into the realms of integrated care, what we know about integrated care and what that looks like in North Oxfordshire, and whether this hospital design is consistent with the integrated care which we're going to be delivering.
Sam, you're on mute.
Apologies, it's the first time today. I think one of the areas that's most applicable, that we're very, very close with both in county and out of county colleagues, is urgent care and same day emergency care. So I think I talked to IAC today. There's not a day goes by that we're not working alongside our colleagues from the County Council, from Oxford Health, and from colleagues from Age UK, for example. So integrated care is very live with us, and it would give us further opportunities to further develop same day emergency care and more ambulatory pathways.
Thank you.
My understanding from briefing from Charmaine, Sam, is that the design is intended to be quite flexible, so that we're trying very hard not to preclude different ways of working by locking us into a building design that can't easily be repurposed. So I think that's an important element of that. But I think it's apart from being flexible, it's hard to know quite what the next step is. Sam has taken the Integrated Assurance Committee this morning through quite a detailed analysis of the challenges around urgent care, and they're really challenges about how we operate across the system. So we've got good assurance on the things we're doing inside the trust, but what we know about inside the trust includes the fact that there's a massive pressure on the Hortons emergency department. I think you were saying we were 2.5 times, was it, what we would on average have at the moment coming into the ED in the Horton, and significant numbers of people that we are medically fit to discharge, but we can't quickly move them out, particularly the ones who are not from Oxfordshire. So no, you're quite right to say this is all about the system, and nothing we do on the buildings should stop us being able to work on a system basis. But we can't wait to find out whether we have a new hospital to do that. Obviously, we have to get on sorting those things out now.
I mean, if I had a magic wand, I'd be looking at how general practice is done.
Coates Pharmacy, account number D8415.
Oh, I think I actually need to mute for the Teams call while you sort out the. The evidence you were showing us earlier, Sam, suggests that actually we're well supported by primary care. So this is not a primary care failure; it's a pressure on primary care.
No, but I think, Graham, your point. I mean, we've had some early indication. There's a survey, an Ipsos Mori survey, that the final results will be released over the next 24 hours. But we've had some sort of early look at some of the embargoed results, which will really support us with our communications as a system. And really, what's coming, the public really trusts the hospitals, and we don't have the opportunity to redirect people, to a building next door, whereas some other hospital sites have urgent and emergency care centres on site. We're not blessed in that way, and actually it's very, very difficult when people present at the emergency department for us to ask them to go somewhere else. So we don't, and we've got very congested departments. So as you say, opportunity to sort of have one-stop shops where people, it's tricky enough to navigate the health service as it is. If there's any opportunity to work in greater partnership with fit-for-purpose buildings and keep people upright and in ambulatory pathways, then that's absolutely what we'll be going for.
Might that be something useful to bring to the Council of Governors, the urgent care sort of challenges that are there? Gemma.
Thank you, Sam, for your presentation. And it is a really exciting prospect, but I understand how competitive this is when there's only 8 sites. And so my question really is there a plan B if we don't get the go further?
So interestingly, Sir Jonathan's been plotting with me to have a follow-up master planning briefing for the board. I know that Charmaine came to governors previously and updated on master planning. It's one of mine and Charmaine's personal objectives. So that will, if you like, be the sort of plan B, plan B planning.
But Gemma, I'm very keen we don't talk about plan B, because I think if anybody gets a clue that we have a plan B that is viable, that reduces our chance of getting the money. So we definitely are committed to looking at the best use of the sites, and there's also work on clinical strategy going forward, which picks up what are the right things to do on that site. But I think we should hold our nerve on that for a few more weeks until we hear about whether we're progressing to the next stage.
And what's terribly difficult is the capital constraints of the NHS at the moment. So there's been some, really innovative use of space, but we are sort of space constrained and capital constrained to really transform some of our pathways. So there genuinely isn't a plan B in the back pocket. There'll be some difficult conversations around some of the principles for master planning and what our options are. But there isn't a draft plan B.
But there is a commitment that if we don't get this, we will be working on it. So we're not going to stop getting the Norton site improved if we don't get this, but we don't have a particular blueprint for doing it. Okay, I think I need to move things on. But we're sticking with you, Sam, because we need to pick up issues around maternity. Obviously, everyone's aware of the Care Quality Commission report, but there's also quite a lot of other things going on in maternity as well. So I think you should feel free to use the opportunity to brief governors on what you think they need to know as outside the CQC report, if that's useful.
Okay, I've just got 3 or 4 slides that I might start with, and then I'll just widen out to some of the operational pressures, if that's okay. I think I sent them through, Neil. Fantastic. So just 3 or 4 slides. The first couple of slides, the first one, I think either talks about the must or the should do's. So our governors will know that we've received our CQC report. I talked a little about this at AGM and very much emphasised that apart from a couple of what you could call own goals, when the inspectors find something out of date in a bag, largely the material issues were areas that we were well aware of and working on. So just lifted there the must do's, and the next slide is the should do's. But let's move on, I think, to the next slides where I can just share some of the developments. So Eileen may come in and tell me the deadline. We haven't yet got the deadline on the action plan that we need to send off to the CQC. So we have got an overarching action plan that we're working against, and Eileen's team's been critical in supporting us getting that right, making sure absolutely everything's in there. That's due to be approved with the service next week. And as I say, there's a number of actions that we've already undertaken. The oversight of this action plan will be via the maternity governance processes. I'll talk a little bit about that because Tony is our maternity and neonatal safety champion from a non-executive perspective and hugely supportive to me as the board maternity and neonatal safety champion. Next slide, please. So actions to date. I want to focus a little bit around culture and safety culture, but I'll do that when the slides are off, just so that I can see the screen properly. So I'll come back to that in a moment. There is already a plan in place around documentation. David's team are helping us at the moment with an independent review to advise on procurement for a maternity EPR. And there is also work underway in ensuring that our training records are uploaded to the electronic learner management system to ensure that we can pull the right reports. Next slide. There's the estates issues. You'll remember that they talked about sort of privacy and dignity and the ability to have en suites. The Women's Centre is a very old block. We've been raising both regionally and nationally that maternity doesn't appear to have any of those bid opportunities that we've talked about. So in the last 4 or 5 years, the capital bid opportunities are very much focused urgent care, elective care, and it's pretty difficult that we aren't able to make any capital improvements of a significant nature, because that's what it would require to bring the Women's Centre up to a much more modern environment for our ladies. So we've already completed some of the estates work that were picked up. That were picked up on the inspection around baby abduction. Oh, Lost that slide.
Sorry, Sam, I think it's on its way back.
It's on its way back. So we've worked on our baby abduction drills, and we've worked on some of the estates work to complete ensuring that we've got safe and secure environment. And in fact, we're just having a bit of a wider think, because we do care for new mums in some of our other areas, such as surgical emergency unit, if they have surgical complications, abscesses, etc. So looking at surgical assessment unit swipe cards as well. A whole range of skills and drills that really needed a refresh, and some support around medicines management and medicine safety. Next slide. Or is that it? So if we come off the slides, and I'll just talk a little bit about culture, and then a little bit about some of the operational issues that we're under pressure with at the moment. So there was quite a lot in there around open and transparent culture. There was some really good development around how the safe learning from incidences had developed, and there was some really positive indications around how culture had developed. However, there were a number of staff that still were unhappy, particularly with the senior leadership team. So I guess in confidence, there is a concluding respect and dignity at work investigation, which I'm case managing.
Because this is a public meeting.
Yep, and keeping the chairman briefed on. And there is a huge piece of work that we're likely to get some external support on around safety culture, speaking up, and leadership. So we have support from the national team. Jackie Dunkley-Bent is the Chief Midwifery Officer for England, and I've engaged with her and our regional midwife to provide support. Health Education England are supporting us with some funding, with a number of interventions to support learning and creating that safe, psychological safe environment. A couple of other organisations have advised in terms of bringing in additional bandwidth and OD support, because we're pretty stretched across the organisation at the moment from a capacity perspective. So the senior leadership team, Terry and myself, met with a company last week who are preparing a proposal to really do some quite intensive work over probably a 12 to 15 week period, and some diagnostics for us and some OD support. So I think some of the interventions that we're planning will really support both the senior leadership team and the midwives. We're also doing some local safety huddles and listening events, the first of which is on Thursday with our community teams. And Tony and I, in our roles of board safety champions, are regularly meeting with the clinical director, director of midwifery, and the neonatal team to work through all of the actions that we've agreed in relation to this. Operationally, not unique to us. In fact, it's certainly the picture across the southeast, if not nationally. There is significant unplanned absence from the service. That relates to sickness, the usual sort of sickness, annual leave, but also an increased pressure on maternity leave because of COVID restrictions, long COVID and other absences. This is totaling circa 35% of absence, which severely disables the service. So you will have seen in Trust Communications and probably external media that we currently have 2 of our midwifery-led units suspended, and that's a weekly review that we undertake with the regional team. We have 43 new midwives planned in pipeline to join us over the coming months. I think we've got about 17 starting in the next week to 10 days. And we've made a decision that we're going to keep those new midwives supernumerary to create the right environment for them to on board with us as an organisation, and be supported effectively so that we can retain them and that they feel that they're able to function in a safe environment. Prior to some of these absences, we had slightly over-recruited. So as a trust, we started off in a much healthier position than some of our colleagues across the BOB network. And we're in regular contact with the regional and the national teams for support. And that support is very much around senior leadership, because for example, the frequency of the on-call, on-duty rotas by supporting their midwives in the delivery suite and out in the community are quite intense. The level of redeployment from community services into delivery suite is significantly more frequent than we would normally have. So it's a real service under pressure, and for that reason, bringing in some external support to just augment some of the cultural work that we want to do, I think is being seen as really positive at the moment. Despite this, I'll let Tony speak as well in a moment. Despite this, the team are well supporting each other. We haven't seen an increase in incidences. We haven't seen an increase in complaints. And there is some light at the end of the tunnel with the new colleagues joining us. Relationships with our obstetricians and midwives is very strong, and there's more and more things that they're coming up with each week. So last week they brought a new buddy system in for consultants to be buddied up with band 7s. So the strength of the multi-professional team, I think, is really paying off. Tony, I don't know what else we might add to give assurance.
No, that's a very good summary, Sam, and I would simply add that from a board perspective, from my position, I've been very impressed by the positive and comprehensive nature, as well as the speed of response to the CQC review. And I think it's also important to remember that the CQC found many positives in our service, particularly in relation to safety and staff attitude, knowledge, and so on. So I think there were many positives to take away. That's of course not to diminish the tasks that we've been set, but I'm confident that we've set about those very quickly and very well. So that's all I would like to add, as well as, of course, to commend you and the staff for bringing all of this together.
Thanks, Tony. I think those who know this service over a period of years will know that there's some very long-standing challenges that will always take time to go to get turned around. And actually, a lot of what was in the CQC report recognised that progress was being made, but it wasn't as consistent as it needs to be in the future. I've got Cecilia, and then I have Martin.
Thank you. I have to say I'm profoundly disappointed that it took a whistleblower going to the CQC to highlight some of these problems. When I started as a GP here 25 years ago, there were problems in maternity. It was the service I felt was the most problematic. Have the NEDs, have the board taken the eye off the ball? I know we've had COVID, but I am very unhappy about some of these things. Again, we had problems with infection control and hygiene. Were you getting regular reports from your infection control team, who are excellent at the JR? I know cultural issues take time to resolve, and my goodness, that department has had cultural issues. But if we go back to the Trust's values, I find extraordinarily upsetting the fact that there's no dedicated bereavement room. The misery of delivering a dead baby and maybe being induced for 2-3 days for a couple, hearing happy parents around them, babies crying, is really way outside, as far as I can see, in the modern age, living within Trust values. You know, there are trusts that have outstanding maternity CQC reports. Are you thinking about visiting them and seeing what they're doing right? I feel for the women, I mean, all the years of experience, I cannot do this dispassionately because I've heard the pain over the years. You know, even relatively early miscarriages, the pain is carried for the entire family's life. They will come in on the due date of the baby. It doesn't go away. And to, you know, I would ask you, with your capital investments, to look at a bereavement room of sufficient quality to respect the pain and problems those ladies are going through. I think it's imperative. I'm sorry, and my voice shakes because I'm stunned by this lack, and I'll be quiet now.
Thanks, Cecilia. I think we want to disentangle a few things there. it didn't take the whistleblower to get the board focused on this. I think probably pretty much since time you've arrived, Sam, but certainly since time I've arrived, we've flagged up some issues on this, and we can't really say more because without disclosing the very detailed nature of the points to raise, which are still being explored, I don't think we can really demonstrate that. But actually a series of things were already in train. They're not yet adequate, but they were in train. So it wasn't the whistleblowing that did that. It was the whistleblowing that triggered the CQC coming in, but it wasn't the whistleblowing that triggered the work that's going on around quality. I do think you're absolutely right on the bereavement room points. I don't think any of us who've walked around and seen that think it's satisfactory, which doesn't make it's not the only part of that building that isn't satisfactory either, I think, Sam, but there has been a fair bit done into that. So I think those things are important, and you're also right to say that we're all disappointed with the infection control things that were found there, and they're also consistent with other bits of the JR that the CQC saw. There are some own goals there that we really ought to be able to put right. But Sam, do you want to pick up some other aspects of Cecilia's comments?
Yeah, just as you say, we obviously can't speak around the CQC, around the whistleblowing elements. However, what I would say is our relationship and transparency with the CQC is very strong. We meet with them regularly as a whole exec, and I frequently have one-to-one conversations with our senior inspection team, and we've had numerous conversations over the last 6 to 12 months. And I think reflecting with other colleagues, I'm, on a development program for board safety champions, and talking to other colleagues, as you say, who are outstanding or who have got challenges. It's quite difficult if you share very much as we do with our transparent culture, the issues that you have. In fact, I believe we flagged to the CQC most of our cultural concerns. Then they can't ignore it. Equally, if they find them, they can't ignore it either. So I think that our approach of being very transparent and open and sharing concerns being raised by staff and the interventions that we were putting in was the right thing to do. What we want to do now is really speed up and strengthen the interventions so that we can hold, much more supportive events and enable the leadership team to do their roles in that, rather than, sort of spending time organising things. They can attend some of the safety huddles and really work on some of the improvements. The bereavement room, I absolutely agree. And as you can see on the slides, there's work in train of that. What's really difficult, and the thing that we struggle with most, as I say, is that when we look at capital prioritisation, and things are going to get much tougher over the next couple of years, actually, the things that meet the capital prioritisation are the compliance issues and the statutory requirements. And that's an issue that we're talking at board about and regionally around the residual risks from a quality perspective and from a patient perspective, patient safety perspective that we're carrying. And more, we're seeking charity support for some of the things that traditionally they would have said an organisation should have done themselves. We're bringing them along, Jason and I, as the liaison members of the charity committee, to support us with things that are highly unlikely to be able to move up the prioritisation list. But that doesn't mean that we don't see that as a priority. We put in with some of the national funding for bereavement midwives, but the national funding really ended up going to support base midwife staffing across the country. So whilst this isn't a picture that we're proud of, as I say, we were slightly over-recruited prior to the CQC coming in and prior to some of these operational constraints. And when we look across Bob, they're in a very much more difficult position. On the IPC, I absolutely agree, but what I would say in all honesty is some of this is symptomatic of the short-staffedness. And it really relates to some of the areas that the midwives are responsible for, cleaning of equipment, etc. So I think it's right that we have given ourselves some breathing space and suspended a couple of services, and we're working quite closely now with NHSI around really public expectation and really whether we will be able to continue to offer so many different options. We've not had to take down our home birthing. We've been able to run our alongside MLU at the John Radcliffe and our other two MLUs, but really some of the national conversations are being more focused on, the safest practice, which may well not be in previous units. So it's a very pressured time for the services at the moment.
Thanks, Martin.
Well, I would just like to say thank you for coming and talking so frankly to us and taking the time to do it. I wonder if I could ask two things about the last bullet point on the must-do list. One question was, are there any metrics which you will be able to follow to show how well progress is being made against the issues in that box? And secondly, do you think the freedom to speak up Guardian system has something to offer and could be a more help than it has been so far?
Yeah, I can't remember what was on the bottom of the slide, but I can tell you, I can share the way that we will monitor the action plan. Or are you talking about clinical metrics, Martin?
I think
Sorry.
cultural issues and
Cultural issues.
people bringing up issues and
Sure. Yeah, and I'll bring Eileen in a moment, because actually we're all fresh from a board deep dive into freedom to speak up and safety culture and psychological safety. And in fact, we were just talking through that the new staff survey that's live at the moment has got a number of questions that will be able to get down to the granular detail at service level around level of confidence for staff being able to raise concerns and speak up. I think it depends on how you look at it. I'm heartened that actually a number of concerns have been raised directly with me recently. So our community team, if I give you an example, have raised concerns that this redeployment issue. So we've been redeploying community midwives into the delivery suite more frequently than not. And through some discussion with Terry and Megan, we've chosen to run a safety huddle on Thursday. So just really trying to keep open that the executive and the non-executives are very keen to listen and to hear, but also we've been talking through, and I'll hand over to Eileen, that balance of how I think we were talking through walking alongside people, working through the normal line management for escalation of concerns and really ensuring that there's a line of sight for individuals that they can escalate and they can use freedom to speak up when they feel they've exhausted all other avenues and there's a significant patient safety issue. But what we're really trying to generate is working with senior leadership teams, working with our wellbeing colleagues, and creating that culture where people can raise concerns at a local level and feel confident that they've been heard and that issues can be resolved or escalated up if more support's required. I'm sure Eileen wants to come in for a moment on that one.
Before Eileen comes in, Martin, can I say it did come up, the maternity issues did come up through the freedom to speak up process. So we did pick them up from there chronologically sort of overlapping with when they went to the CQC. And one of the challenges is disentangling whether there are two lots of concerns or whether there's one lot of concerns that's been aired in a number of places as we get to the bottom of it. But certainly it was used. But we spent quite a lot of time this afternoon working out how we can use it better. So I'll hand over to Eileen for that.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's not much more to add to that, Martin. The FTSU Guardian, if she was with us, the interim FTSU Guardian, lead Guardian, Dr. Taffy Makaya, would say that she has been in regular dialogue with the maternity service and users, staff there have used the service quite a lot, and she's put them in the right direction. And the previous Guardian was already directing things to the chair, and the Guardian does meet with the chair directly and myself, so that is quite helpful. She also joined us for the IAC deep dive in relation to the FTSU project we've just completed. And one of the things we have been debating is how to make the services effective as possible through existing mechanisms, as well as trying to layer a separate mechanism out. So we are taking away the discussions from our session that we've just had. And just to remind governors, we are planning, all things being well, on bringing a paper back to the public board on the 10th of November, which will set out the findings of that review and some of the lessons that we can learn out of it for going forward. And those would be incorporated into the work that Sam has been doing with the maternity team.
Thanks. I think in view of the time, I should try and move things on. I can see from the chat that there's some interest in charity fundraising. I don't think this is about new building, though, is it? It's about proper environment in the facilities that are there, Sam, and I'm sure that you'd be happy to pick that up outside the meeting if need.
Yeah, there's just one thing that I haven't mentioned that's really important, which is our Maternity Voices partnership. So that's a group of users with a very strong voice and a formal part in the governance structure with our local maternity system. And we're working closely with them, but are really looking at further strengthening the voice of our patients. And that really is the national drive as well. So MVP, Maternity Voices Partnership, you'll hear more about in the future to give us more assurance.
Thanks. I learned a lot when I visited them. Ruby, I think I've got you next on the list.
Hello, I just have a slight question, because I was talking to someone the other day about their experience when they actually gave birth, and I wanted to do some research into the policies first, but I couldn't actually find them anywhere. So I just thought I'd ask the question about the midwife's prerogative, because I heard that at OUH the policy is that midwives can't prescribe pain relief and stuff, only like doctors can. And so I just thought I'd ask, because whilst we were on the subject, whether that's a thing, and because then when I looked into different people's reviews and stuff, and I felt like it was coming up about that being an issue. But yeah, I wanted to ask it more of a question rather than a point, because I'm obviously not massively knowledgeable about it.
That's okay.
Thanks, Ruby. Sam.
So we have midwives who can prescribe. We have mechanisms for midwives to give pain relief without a prescription whilst they await a prescription. Obviously, the epidurals need to be administered by an anaesthetist, but there certainly isn't any clinical reasons for delay in pain relief.
So I think, Ruby, if that's an individual's experience, then perhaps they should bring that to our attention and we can find out about it. It's not a system problem, but it doesn't, of course, mean it doesn't sometimes go wrong. Thanks for picking that up, Ruby.
Thank you.
Okay, I think then that takes us to item 9, which is the future arrangements for meetings. Given that we're sort of 20 minutes late, Martin, and your working group produced a very helpful, succinct report, I don't think we need you to introduce too much of the background. If there are things you want to say them. Otherwise, we can just check whether people support the recommendation. So, Martin.
Well, there are 3 recommendations at the end, which are, I think, clear enough. It was a useful discussion, and I think it's worth emphasising that there was quite a strong feeling we should return to live Council of Governors meetings when the rules allow it, because we felt that we're missing quite a lot of things that you can't get online. At the same time, we all agreed that there are great virtues to having committee meetings online because they tend to be more efficient. I think we also felt that the meeting, particularly the ability to interact directly with NEDs, is something we've found in those committees. And dare I say it, sometimes informally with NEDs, if you like, away from a scripted minuted meeting. So we very much want that to continue, and unanimous enthusiasm for continuation of the coffee morning idea, which worked so well earlier. But apart from that, unless anyone else at the meeting has anything to add, I think the paper is done. Thank you very much, Neil, for the scrupulous record.
So I don't see anyone rushing in, Martin. You've obviously fairly summarised them. We are looking into whether we can begin to get the board together towards the end of November, but not on the site of the hospital. So I think we feel that it's premature to get an influx of people into hospital while visiting restrictions are still in place. I think if we manage to make that work, we could be pretty confident that the next full meeting of the Council of Governors could be face to face. We usually meet off site, but that's not till January. I think the next full meeting. So I definitely think we should expect that to be the case unless the virus changes its behaviour. I think the other recommendations make a lot of sense. They're sort of refining good practice that we've got. So I'd encourage the council to accept the recommendations that Martin's group has put forward. That's great. Well done, Martin. Thank you very much. Item 10 is the report from the External Audit Working Group, which I think is for you, Paula.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'll be quite brief. I'm going to take the paper as read. I hope it's self-explanatory. It just serves to do two things. One, to put before you a set of terms of reference for the working group and ask you to formally approve it. Those terms of reference are completely consistent with ones we have used before for other like exercises and have been approved by the governors before. So I would hope that you could approve that formally for us. And the other is just to update, really, it's in the paper, the tender process is out in the market now, and we'll come back at a later date and tell you how we're getting on.
Thank you very much, Paula. Can I thank Martin, Shad and Nina for their help on that, and suggest to the council that the recommendations make a lot of sense, and that invite you to approve the terms of reference and note the progress. Well done, Paula. Thank you very much. Then we get to Performance, Workforce and Finance Committee reports. Obviously, some of that's already been on our agenda, but Cecilia, what else do you want to comment?
I think virtually everything has been thoroughly covered. For Jonathan, at the meeting, this is Jonathan White, we were told that the Trust is in contact with stakeholders, and Bruno has committed to meeting patient representative groups in ophthalmology. So I think just about everything else has been covered. And another thing was that the Trust is exploring the use of Bob ICS-wide outpatient referral hub, and that the Trust is also going to pilot a system to enable regular electronic contact with patients to see if their condition has changed. So those are the only three little bits I've picked up outside what's already been spoken about, though I am lying here stunned by the fact that Helen Heim enjoyed a PWF meeting. That's fantastic.
Thank you. We'll get it on the minute so she can't deny it. She's not here to hear you say that. She's had to leave. Thank you very much. That takes us to PMQ, and that's you, Sally Jane.
Yes, hello. So the Patient Experience Membership and Quality Group, we've had two meetings since the last Council of Governors. We like to have a visit from our young governors, and because of school holidays, they traditionally come to us to our July meeting. So Mariam and Ruby came along, visited us and gave us a presentation. They reported on the activities of YIPI, which is the Trust's Young People's Executive. During COVID, YIPI's activities have been conducted online, both locally and for their contacts nationally. We heard that text messaging has been used in the Children's Hospital for patients and parents to give their feedback, and that has resulted in a lot more comments being received. Many of the comments praise the care and compassion of Trust staff. And where comments have mentioned ways that improvements could be made, YIPI are looking to see how those improvements could be implemented. And the text system is also being spread to maternity too, so we'll hear how that goes. YIPI currently consists of young people aged 11 to 18, but they're looking at ways it could be extended up to 25-year-old people, and also how they could engage with children as young as 8, and also how they could spread their demographic to reach more seldom heard groups than the general people who normally attend their meetings.
In July, we also discussed the outcomes from the Governor's Seminar, looking at public and member engagement in the Trust. And we discussed how all governors could extend our use of wider key community settings to promote membership and inform the wider public about the Trust. In our September meeting, we had a presentation and discussion about the Trust's management of sepsis. We found out how the Trust is doing in relation to sepsis and the improvements they are making to try and improve the response rates to provide rapid treatment in collaboration with other local health partners. And it's definitely something that P&Q will hope to monitor going forward. We also received a presentation report about the CQC report concerning DNA CPR resuscitation and the Trust's response to it. Now, the CQC wrote this report amid concerns nationally about this subject during COVID. And I have to say that there were no concerns that were raised about inappropriate decisions during COVID at the OUH Trust. And in the light of the CQC, our Trust is adopting the CQC respect guidelines. And these, the strapline is protect, respect, and connect. And the Trust aims to put patients and their significant loved ones, or whoever it may be, at the centre of all discussions and decisions that are being taken about resuscitation. The conversations must be conducted with compassion and in a manner where all comfort for each patient is considered and provided at these difficult conversations. There must be adequate education and training available for staff who are dealing with these circumstances. And all the conversations must be electronically recorded and shared with all other health and social care agencies involved with the care of that particular patient. And it's seen as a dynamic document, so it needs constant review and update and discussion with the patient and their loved ones. Feedback and monitoring within the Trust are obviously vital, and this is being set up. And health and social care workers must also feel able to speak up about anything to do with this if they need to. So again, that's definitely something for our committee on behalf of governors to monitor. We looked at the current arrangements for visiting throughout the Trust. We do, as governors, get lots of updates about this, and it was good to have them all drawn into one document. The ways in which loved ones are being able to keep in touch in the different ways electronically, and what the current visiting policy at the Trust is. And finally, I won't go into details. We had a discussion about maternity, and of course that's now been taken up in this meeting.
Thank you very much, Sally Jane. Any comments or questions from governors? Okay, thank you very much. We're miraculously close to being on time, and we're at the lead governor report. Cecilia.
I haven't got anything to report, but I believe, Neil, you have been in contact with Health Watch, and there aren't any particular issues.
I haven't had anything specific raised with me for this meeting, and we might approach them for next time for a more formal update from them, as it's a while since we've had that, perhaps.
Thanks.
Thanks, Cecilia. Perhaps we might log on to this, that Cecilia and Neil and I had a quick debrief on the annual meeting, and we're grateful for governors who fed in some feedback and suggestions on that, which some of which are for next year's annual meeting, and some of which are sort of picking up things we might be able to refer to PMQ for thinking about how we engage with members. But I'm very grateful to all the feedback on that. I'm not aware of other business other than the things we flagged up earlier, so I think we may be able to save a few minutes of your lives from a Council of Governors meeting. Cecilia, is that a new hand?
It's a new hand.
Cecilia.
Actually, I just really in my role as a governor, and it's just to mention, and Ash, I don't know if you're online, but it would be incredibly helpful to have your feedback. I was talking to a community pharmacist when I went to book my flu jab, and he was describing a lot of difficulty with the TTAs, or the prescribing post-TTAs with the patients who are discharged from the hospital. He said they were often not given much of supplies. He thought perhaps a week. I'm not sure. I haven't been able to verify that, and I don't think that's my job. Maybe Ash could do so. And that discharge summaries, as ever, are not always out in good time, and with the incredible difficulty that patients have getting a GP appointment. It's been very stressful for him and his staff, who are getting a lot of abuse on the phone. Why aren't my drugs ready? Why can't I have it? And a lot of them they cannot obviously prescribe without or dispense without authorization. And I thought it may be some misunderstandings, but I thought it would be very helpful to have some feedback at some point. I know there is a local pharmacy committee. He said he had reported these difficulties to them, but to no avail at present. But if we're going to have successful discharges from the hospital, the medication that the patients are discharged on, obviously terribly important that the pharmacist can deliver them. And the other thing, of course, to point out is many of these patients are elderly. They don't have access to computers or whatever, and they're generally not very well if they've been in hospital. They're really not able to get up and come down to the pharmacist. Anyway, I just like further clarification on that, because it's very important to discharge.
Thanks, Cecilia. We might take away the discharge issue. We have been talking today about medicines reconciliation. It was something that Ash had raised early on, and we had a specific report in the a gloss on the integrated performance report to enable us to have a bit of discussion on that. But I'm not sure, Ash, we quite got as far as discharge. We were looking at problems of reconciliation while people were inside, from memory.
Yes. At this stage, I think we need discharge as another aspect of what we need to get to. We looked at it from the perspective, we knew that everybody, when they get to discharge, does have a reconciliation at discharge, but it was about the bit before that for me at this stage.
So, Cecilia, will you leave that with us to take away?
But yes, that would be great, because I do think we have to increase the conversations with the various stakeholders to succeed in the new world.
Thank you. In which case, I think that takes us to the end of the meeting.
Sorry, apologies, Chair. I think Jonathan Wyatt also had something you wanted to raise.
Is that a new hand, Jonathan? It's been there a while, I think.
Have you pressed mute? Yes, I have something I'd like to raise very quickly.
Thank you. Sorry for misunderstanding that. I thought it was a legacy hand, as they call it. Jonathan.
The government, via Lord Sainsbury, has introduced this week T levels. There are healthcare T levels which have been trialled in Swindon. From my analysis, they are a form of apprenticeship. This will enable the Oxford Trust to get in touch with local schools and have youngsters 16 to 18 in as assistants, working, I suppose, in a nurse care style and learning at the same time, and hopefully becoming nurses of the future. Can I ask that Bruno and you, Sir Jonathan, bring the hospital into the van of this, if there is any possible opportunity, and get weaving on it right away? That's all.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. Sam has the executive responsibility for apprenticeships, and I think we've lost her presence, Neil, unless I... So I'm not aware,
I can't see her on
of
the
that
call
particular
now.
scheme that's been announced. I am aware of discussions over apprenticeships routes into nursing, so I know Sam is on top of that. So I will take that away and get a briefing from Sam on that.
Okay, I just thought it came up and I thought this is ideal, because I know we've been recruiting overseas, but this means that we can go local and there'll be no accommodation charges.
there is a range of views, shall we say, about the effectiveness of those routes. So I'm not going to commit to being ideal, Jonathan, but I will commit to finding out more about it.
Goody good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great. Okay, it is now exactly 5 o'clock, and I'm going to declare the meeting closed, because anyone who has a discipline about their diary has probably got another meeting starting in 30 seconds time. So thank you very much, everybody. That was a really useful and helpful discussion. Lots of good things for us to pick up and take away. And I hope to see you all before our next meeting in January, at least virtually. Thanks very much, everyone.
Okay.
That's what it was, yes.
Did you think I put it fairly
Yes.
shortly?
Yes.